Today is December 17th, 2023. The U.S. proxy war against Russia in Ukraine continues, and it continues to unravel and crumble. And we continue to see the West as it attempts to grapple with this reality. But before I get into all of that, let's just take a look at the map, liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian map, so keep that in mind when looking at it. Again, everything in red is held by Russia. This is the line of contact. And we zoom in. We've been hearing a lot over the last couple of weeks about a Ukrainian offensive across the Dnipro River. And we can see virtually no evidence of that, even on this pro-Ukrainian map. We see Russia bombing the Ukrainian side of the Dnipro River. We don't see anything at all about Ukrainian advances on the Russian side of the Dnipro River. We continue toward the line of contact in Zaporozhye and southern Donbas. And we can see, again, constant fighting by Russian forces encircling and pushing out Ukrainian forces from the meager gains they made during their 5-month offensive. And again, just to put it in perspective, this little indent, this salient along the line of contact, this was meant to go all the way to the coast of the Sea of Azov. It was meant to cut this land bridge from the Crimean Peninsula all the way to the rest of Russia. And you can see how far short they fell of that objective. If we go to the Donbas region, right outside Donetsk city, Avdiivka, we continue to watch the slow, grinding encirclement of Avdiivka, this heavily fortified Ukrainian-held city. We can see Russia gradually gaining control over the logistical routes into the city. And again, people are talking about how slow this is, but this is what Russia has done throughout this entire special military operation. There are no big arrow offensives for Russia. They're using their long-range fires, their advantage in long-range fires, to incrementally dismantle Ukrainian defenses and then overwhelm them. And the same story can be said outside of Bakhmut. Repeated attempts by Ukraine to retake that city has failed, despite when they withdrew from the city, claiming that it was irrelevant strategically. We can see there's heavy fighting going on around Seversk in this salient here. And of course, around Kupiansk, fighting continues there. Russia continues putting pressure on Ukraine there. And as I've pointed out many, many times, Russia is not going to go on a big arrow offensive like Ukraine attempted to do over the course of this year or last year in the fall around Kharkov and Kherson. Russia is going to continue growing its military strength, putting pressure along the entire line of contact, exploiting where cracks begin to form, and they will continue carrying out long-range strikes deep behind the line of contact to overall continue chipping away at Ukrainian military power and continue emptying out the stockpiles of Ukraine's Western backers. Now, let's get back to that cross-river operation. I remember for weeks pro-Ukrainian commentators swearing that this was going to amount to another major offensive, that Ukraine has all this hidden equipment that they didn't use during the 5-month offensive. They've got it all staged. They're going to break through by crossing the Dnipro River and breaking through Russian defenses. And I have no idea why they think that that was possible. And now the New York Times confirms that this is not a viable offensive. It is a suicide mission. And that's exactly what they say in their headline, as a matter of fact. Ukrainian Marines on suicide mission in crossing the Dnipro River. Soldiers frustrated by positive reports from Ukrainian officials break their silence, describing the effort as brutalizing and ultimately futile. And if you remember, my coverage and other analysts who are being objective covering this cross-river Kherson attempt at an offensive, that is what we said it was. It was futile. It was public relations at best. The New York Times says for 2 months, Ukraine's Marine Corps has been spearheading an assault across the Dnipro River in the southern region of Kherson to recapture territory from Russian troops. The operation is Ukraine's latest attempt in its flagging counteroffensive to breach Russian defenses in the south and turn the tide of the war. That the counteroffensive, or I call it the offensive, Ukraine's offensive, is over. It failed. Soldiers and Marines who have taken part in the river crossings describe the offensive as brutalizing and futile, as waves of Ukrainian troops have been struck down on the river banks or in the water even before they reach the other side. Conditions are so difficult, a half dozen men involved in the fighting said in interviews that in most places there is nowhere to dig in. The first approaches tend to be marshy islands threaded with rivulets or meadows, and have become a quagmire of mud and bomb craters filled with water. So what the New York Times is finally admitting is what anyone who was watching Ukraine's 5-month offensive objectively, what they would have already long have concluded, that if Ukrainian forces on land could not break through Russian defenses in Kherson and Zaporozhye, how would you possibly do it with fewer resources and also adding in a river crossing? How would that be any easier or more viable? And I just want to remind people that even though we focused a lot on Russian defenses in Zaporozhye during the 5-month offensive, if we go back to this article published a year ago, also in the New York Times, defenses carved into the earth, and I know I've gone over this so many times, but it bears repeating. They show you a map where the defenses were being built even then in December of last year. And you see this big rectangle, Kherson. That is exactly where these Ukrainian forces are trying to cross the river and attack these defenses that were covered in this New York Times article last year. Now, this is in the Donbas region, east of Bakhmut. They also have a map here of the defenses in Kherson. And so this is where they're trying to cross the river, and this is where all of these kilometers and kilometers of layered Russian defenses were already built as far back as last year in December 2022. So this had no hope at all of ever being successful, and I can't even imagine why they would have conducted this operation in the first place. Maybe as a diversion, but if you're outnumbered and outgunned to the degree that you are in Ukraine, then you're just wasting your own men and material that you don't have to spare on a diversion where you should be putting everything that you have into your defenses. The New York Times says, with Ukraine's counteroffensive bogged down and the United States and even the European Union showing signs of cutting back aid, and we'll talk more about this cutting back of aid here in a moment, the cross-river offensive has been keenly watched for signs that Ukraine can regain momentum against Russian forces. They never had any momentum. The hope is that they can create a breakthrough deep enough to threaten Russia's supply routes and its hold in the south. The Marine Corps, rebuilt to full strength this year with several newly formed brigades, was assigned the task. And I just showed, this is New York Times saying this now. I just showed you their article from last year explaining how extensive and layered and formidable Russian defenses are in exactly this area that they're talking about. So I hope this finally puts this issue to rest. The New York Times, pro-Western, pro-Ukrainian news publication, openly admitting that this is a failed operation, has no hope of succeeding. It is brutal, it is futile, it is a suicide mission. Understanding that the 5-month-long Ukrainian offensive has completely failed, admitting that this cross-river operation has failed, there's failure all along the line of contact by Ukraine, we continue to see an attempt to find some sort of new strategy Ukraine can use to turn the tide. And I talked about this in my previous update, about how the focus has been on Crimea, and I've explained in depth why, at best, Ukraine can score public relations points, propaganda victories in regards to Crimea, but they have no way of actually inhibiting the Russian military in terms of operating on Crimea or from Crimea. They have no ability to threaten or take Crimea. This is just out of the question. They cannot even cross the Dnipro River. They cannot even get through the first several kilometers of Russian defenses in Zaporozhye. How are they getting to Crimea? And now we have an article like this. This is from, again, this is also from the New York Times. U.S. and Ukraine search for a new strategy after failed counteroffensive. President Vladimir Zelensky arrived in Washington at a critical moment, both on the battlefield and on Capitol Hill. And it says American and Ukrainian military leaders are searching for a new strategy they can begin executing early next year to revive Kiev's fortunes and flagging support for the country's war against Russia, according to U.S. and Ukrainian officials. And then the article attempts to rewrite the last 2 years of history. They attempt to portray Russia as having completely failed, and only now are they regaining their strength, which we know that this is false. Russia had a plan A and a plan B when they went into Ukraine in early 2022. Ideally, they would have liked for Ukraine to have immediately gone to the negotiation tables. They did this by storming into Ukraine with big arrow offensives. They surrounded Kiev. They surrounded several other major cities across Ukraine. They were able to take most of Kherson, Zaporozhye, surrounded Mariupol, secured much of the Donbas. But then Ukraine refused to negotiate. They were encouraged not to by the West. They were told the West would support them for as long as it took. And so they chose war with Russia. However, Russia was fully prepared with Plan B. Plan B was committing to a protracted, large-scale war of attrition. They had prepared for this for many years ahead of time. They expanded their military-industrial capacity. In many ways, it had already been enormous. Something they inherited from the Soviet Union, and they continued developing it and expanding it for precisely this type of war, which is why they are so far ahead of the collective West, the US and Europe combined, when it comes to military-industrial production. So this isn't something that they're just reforming their strength and regaining the initiative. This was always their plan B. They had this all prepared before the first Russian soldier crossed the border. Then this is what the New York Times says. Many Ukrainian leaders do not realize how, so what is the new strategy? Let's get to the bottom of what the new strategy is, according to the New York Times. Many Ukrainian leaders do not realize how precarious continued U.S. funding for the war is, American officials said. These Ukrainian generals and senior civilian officials have unrealistic expectations about what the United States will supply, they said. They're asking for millions of rounds of artillery, for example, from Western stockpiles that do not exist. Keep that in mind. They do not exist. American officials say Ukraine will have to fight on a tighter budget. Some in the U.S. military want Ukraine to pursue a hold and build strategy to focus on holding the territory it has and building its ability to produce weapons over 2024. I'll get to that in just a moment. The United States believes the strategy will improve Ukraine's self-sufficiency and ensure Kiev is in a position to repel any new Russian drive. Does that sound familiar to anyone at all? I know Alexander Mikuras of the Duran talks about this all the time when he sees comparisons between the Vietnam War and this current conflict in Ukraine. And he talks about how the U.S. was looking for an exit strategy in Vietnam. They told the southern Vietnamese government that they were going to give them all of these weapons. They would build them up. They would be able to handle it on their own. They wouldn't need the United States around anymore. And then as the moment the U.S. left, everything collapsed. And the exact same thing was done in regards to the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. They were building up the Afghan government and military. They were supposed to be able to hold on and maintain a stable government. They folded up almost overnight. And so it looks like that is what they are preparing to do with Ukraine, at least if you believe what this New York Times article is saying. Now, in regards to building up Ukraine's ability to manufacture weapons over the course of 2024, it takes years to build factories. If all of your factories have been blown up, and you need to build your factories from scratch, it will take a year, 2 years, 3 years to build the factory and get production up and running under ideal conditions. Saying nothing of being in the middle of a war where Russia still has long-range weapons fully capable of blowing up any factory that you try to rebuild. And they never explain in the article how Ukraine is going to get around that. The New York Times also talks about this supposed naval victory. Ukraine forcing the Black Sea Fleet to relocate. Except when you understand that the Black Sea Fleet's role in this conflict is launching cruise missiles, which can hit targets anywhere in Ukraine, they're still able to do that from their new location. So what did you actually achieve other than public relations or propaganda victory? And the answer is nothing. The Black Sea Fleet is still playing a role in the conflict. They're still launching these cruise missiles. Ukraine has no ability to stop them in doing that. And then this is how the New York Times article ends regarding this new strategy that they're looking to come up with. Ukraine does not need to claw back all of the nearly 20% of the country it has lost to win the war, American officials say. Scoring some strategic and symbolic victories, we were just talking about that, while strengthening their defenses and building up their own ability to produce more weapons, which will never happen, could be enough to strengthen Ukraine's hand when calls for peace talks to end the war inevitably restart. So you're not going to win. You don't need to win. Just improve your situation enough ahead of negotiations, which you will have to go and attend. That is how this will end. You're not going to win. You're going to have to negotiate, but maybe you can negotiate from a position of strength. That's what they're saying right there. American officials are trying to prepare the Ukrainians for next year, telling them that whatever aid Congress approves is not likely to match the kind of funding that Washington provided in the first 2 years of the war. They have to fight smartly and efficiently, said Michael Kaufman, a senior fellow in the Russia and Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, who recently visited Ukraine. If Ukraine and the West make the right investments in pursuit of a long-term strategy, then Ukraine may retake the advantage. Well, this is not going to happen. They're telling Ukraine, do more with less. You have no possible way of achieving victory in the sense of retaking all of the territory you claim Russia took from you. And they admit that Ukraine is going to have to eventually negotiate. But here's the problem. Every time we hear this, negotiate from a position of strength, the longer Ukraine actually holds off, delays negotiations, the weaker the position that they're in. And my friend and colleague Angelo Giuliano often points out that if from 2014 onward, especially after the Minsk agreement was signed, if Ukraine just upheld that, they would still have the Donbas region. It would have autonomy. They wouldn't be able to shell it and bomb it every day, but they would have all of Ukrainian territory intact. Crimea having rejoined the Russian Federation, that is just something that was never going to happen. But had the US not overthrown the Ukrainian government in the first place in 2014, Crimea would actually still be part of Ukraine. At the very beginning, when Russia went in to Ukraine in 2022, if Ukraine negotiated, they would still have Kherson and Zaporozhye. At that point, Russia hadn't organized the referendums. They hadn't officially joined the Russian Federation. So if they had negotiated then and there, they may still have Kherson and Zaporozhye. Now they have none of this. They don't have Crimea, they don't have the Donbas, they don't have Zaporozhye, Kherson, and they risk losing more regions. That is what they risk each day that goes by that they refuse to negotiate. Now, Alexander Mikuras of the Duran did a recent video all about this, talking about how the conflict began in the first place. He went into extreme detail on all of this. It was an excellent presentation. He gets right into it right at the beginning of the video. I'll put that video, the link to that video, in the video description below. Please check that out. But what he pointed out was this narrative that is taking shape, that if the US and Europe don't continue supporting Ukraine, the US and NATO are going to have an angry Russia right on the border of NATO. But Russia is already on the border with NATO. And not because Russia continued expanding and encroaching upon NATO, but because NATO continued expanding and encroaching on Russia right up to and on Russia's borders. If you understand that NATO provoked this conflict by choice, if you understand that, if you understood that Russia had been working with Europe, selling them cheap energy, making profits off of that, trading with Europe. They preferred that rather than having some sort of a new Cold War or even a proxy war against Europe, if you understand that, if you understand that Russia had expressed its concern about NATO's encroachment and drew red lines in regards to Ukraine, and that it was NATO who crossed those red lines, provoking this conflict. If you understand all of that, then you will understand why Russia sees this as existential, and why they will continue to fight until they win, and why they have prepared for many years before this conflict even began to win in ways that the West did not, and in ways the West cannot really catch up to and match at this point. Now, if you live in an inverted reality where NATO was just minding its own business, and then Russia just suddenly out of nowhere invaded Ukraine in 2022, then you're not going to be able to understand the current problems, multiplying problems that Ukraine and Europe and the United States face. And then if you cannot understand the problem, you cannot formulate a realistic solution to solve that problem. It's like believing that up is down and down is up, and you enter into a long jump competition. You keep jumping face first straight into the ground. You will never win. And if you live in a reality where the pursuit of hegemony is self-destructive, then no matter what you try to do, as long as you're pursuing hegemony, you are going to be hurting yourself and anyone else you convince to join you in this pursuit. And this is the inverted reality that the collective West leadership live in. They refuse to wake up from. And until they wake up from this inverted reality, they're going to continue creating these problems in pursuit of hegemony. Now, let's talk about why this debate over US and European funding for Ukraine is not necessarily the central problem. We keep reading these articles and hearing about how Ukraine is running out of everything. If only the US would pass this money to send to Ukraine, all of these problems would go away. As Alexander Mikiros pointed out in that video regarding a CNN article titled, right here, Western officials warn Ukraine is certain to fail against Russia if US doesn't provide more aid. But also in the article it says even if the US does aid Ukraine, there's no guarantee that Ukraine won't fail anyway. The problem is weapons and ammunition and other forms of military support, physical, tangible forms of military support that the US and its allies are running out of. They never had enough to begin with. They're running out of it. They cannot match or exceed what Russia can produce and bring to the battlefield. That is the problem. So no matter whether they pass this funding or not, whether they double the funding or not, doesn't matter. If there aren't artillery rounds to buy, doesn't matter how much money you have to buy them with. Let's look at some of these articles, though, some of these headlines. Here's one from Business Insider. Ukraine says Russia has it outgunned 7-1 when it comes to drones. We've actually heard people say it doesn't matter that Ukraine is out of artillery rounds. They can just use these first-person view kamikaze drones. They can use them instead of artillery rounds. The problem is Russia also has them in much greater quantities. They also have much greater quantities of artillery ammunition. And in this article, it cites Bob Hamilton, a retired U.S. Army colonel and the head of research at the Foreign Policy Research Institute's Eurasia program. And this is what he had told the Washington Post in August. He said that Ukraine doesn't have the drone capacity to strike deep inside Russian territory and at enough targets to erode Russia's will to fight. So we hear about all of these drones that Ukraine is making and deploying, carrying out these strikes deep inside Russia. The goal is to try to somehow erode Russia's will to fight. But if Russia has 7 times, at least at a minimum, 7 times more drones than Ukraine, and they're able to target all sorts of infrastructure, military targets and facilities inside Ukraine, if someone is going to erode someone else's will to fight, first, it's going to be Russia eroding Ukraine's will to fight. It's very simple. Here's an article from the BBC. Ukraine war, shell shortages force us to limit firing, Ukrainian troops tell BBC. It says Ukrainian gunners have to use ammunition rounds sparingly as there is a shortage of artillery shells. Their gun, like most artillery systems provided by the West, fires 155mm projectiles that are also supplied by foreign partners. The problem is Ukraine's troops need more rounds than their allies can currently give them. This is not a new problem. This has been the problem since the West sent 155mm artillery systems to Ukraine. Without ammunition, Ukraine won't just have to stop trying to recapture land. It won't be able to stop Russia's attacks and could ultimately lose this war. And then it says the fact that a $60 billion aid package has stalled in the U.S. Congress amid a row over U.S. border security appears to have contributed to a sense of disillusionment among these men. If there is no U.S. funding, it means that their unit will be unlikely to switch to modern Western guns anytime soon. The lack of aid, they said, means higher losses for Ukraine. They are angry that their lives and sacrifice might be wasted because of what they say is Europe and the U.S. not fully comprehending the importance of military support for Ukraine. Again, even if they gave them this money a month ago, it would not have made any difference. They have no artillery shells to buy with this money. Our Western partners must understand that if we fail to stop Russians, they will go further. Then Europe and America, instead of helping us, will be defending their own lands and their own people will be dying. And this is categorically untrue. And this is why the West emptied out their military arsenals, pumped it all into Ukraine. They know that Russia isn't going to continue past Ukraine. They know that. They emptied out all of their military equipment, fully assured that Russia is not going to attack them after they're done in Ukraine. That's the biggest clue. Unfortunately, these Ukrainians bought the Western talking points that somehow there's a domino effect threatening to unfold, and they have to hold the line. But we know that this is not true. And ignorance can kill, quite literally. Now we have this article right here from ABC News. Ukrainian troops unable to respond to Russian attacks, says lawmaker. We can't win the war single-handedly. You can't win the war even with Western support. Again, there's a fundamental problem here that they refuse to face and acknowledge. It says the Ukrainian politicians' stark warnings come amid warnings from U.S. officials that funding for military aid to Ukraine is running out, with a Ukrainian military official confirming that ammunition stocks are very low. A deal between the Biden administration and leading Republicans to secure an additional $60 billion in additional funding for the war in Ukraine remains elusive because the two sides have not reached a separate agreement on new controls on the U.S. border. Again, has nothing to do with funding. Even if the funding passes, it's not going to be able to buy artillery shells that simply do not exist. And that brings me to the most recent arms package announced by the U.S. Department of Defense, $200 million of weapons drawn from U.S. stockpiles. If you have been following my analysis of the conflict in Ukraine over the last almost 2 years now, you have noticed me covering these packages, and despite money not even being an issue, we have watched the packages shrink in scope and in quantity and in quality. Let's just say it like that. So let's take a look at this one. Biden administration announces new security assistance for Ukraine. This is December 12th, 2023. We can see the list right here. That's it. That's all they're getting. That's all they're getting. Let's go over each one of these items one by one. AIM-9M missiles for air defense and air defense system components. So they're most likely talking about these missiles, Sidewinder missiles, for the NASAM air defense system, which they have transferred to Ukraine in very small quantities. Raytheon on their web page for the AIM-9X Sidewinder missile, if you go over what they say that this is a weapon system configured for easy installation on a wide range of modern aircraft. They name all of these aircraft, and then they talk about the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System, best known as NASAMS. The AIM-9X adds a short-range layer of defense. So that's most likely what this missile is for. It's for relatively short ranges. $200 million. And you have to remember it's going to be divided among all of these systems on the list. How many Sidewinder missiles is that actually going to buy for Ukraine? And how many of these NASAM systems do they have available to begin with? And does it make any difference? Next on the list is additional ammunition for high mobility artillery range rocket systems, HIMARS. They don't talk about numbers. They haven't talked about the quantity of rockets because it is a very small quantity, and they don't want the general public to know just how small the quantity is, because then they would realize how futile this entire endeavor is. Russia certainly knows how many rockets are being given to Ukraine and how many are fired on a daily basis, and we even got a little look into that. This CNN article from May 6, 2023, Russia's jamming of US-provided rocket system complicates Ukraine's war effort. And they admitted that Ukraine was only firing about 18 guided rockets a day. And then they're admitting that a certain percentage of them are not hitting their targets because Russia is successfully jamming them. And then if we look at this article here from Defense News, Lockheed wins $4.8 billion guided rocket contract. So they're talking about more rockets per year. They're talking about going from 6,000 rockets a year to 14,000 rockets a year. 6,000 rockets in 1 year means you can fire about 16 rockets a day. So Ukraine is firing more rockets per day than the US actually makes, which means somewhere rockets for HIMARS have been pulled out of stockpiles. Increasing to 14,000 rockets a year means you have 38 rockets a day, which still is not a lot when you consider how long the line of contact is in Ukraine. Next on the list is 155 millimeter and 105 millimeter artillery rounds. They're sending 105 millimeter artillery rounds to Ukraine because they're out of 155 millimeter artillery rounds. I just talked about the BBC article discussing this shell shortage, and they admit that they had to send these cluster munitions as a replacement for the high explosive rounds that Ukraine actually wants. Next on the list is high-speed anti-radiation missile, HARMS missile. These are meant to home in on air defense radar sets. And we don't hear much about these being very successful. They're not always necessarily meant to hit a radar set and destroy it. What they're meant to do is force radar operators to turn their systems off so that other warplanes following the planes carrying these missiles, they have a chance to go across the line of contact, carry out their mission, and get back before those radars come back on. At least give them a small window of opportunity to operate. But still, we have not seen great success from the Ukrainian Air Force with or without these missiles. Tube launched optically tracked wire guided missiles. These are the TOW missiles. They can be fired by infantry. They're also mounted on vehicles like the Bradleys that the US transferred over to Ukraine. And again, we're not hearing much about these being overly successful. We do see a lot of Bradleys burning on the battlefield or being towed back for repair. Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems. If you take TOW missiles, Javelin, AT-4, if you take all of them all together, just remember they were sent in huge numbers in the very beginning, early 2022, and then US contractors that make these missiles admit that they're out of them and they're not even able to replace them. It will take them years to replace what was sent to Ukraine, let alone bring up production to sustain the numbers that Ukraine needs on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, fighting this scale of conflict. Also remember that these anti-tank guided missiles, sending, say, 5,000 of them to Ukraine does not equal 5,000 destroyed Russian tanks. There have been papers published by the US Army talking about training conditions, properly trained US troops firing anti-tank missiles and having about a 19% hit rate. The kill rate is even lower than 19%. So if you're sending these to Ukrainian troops with little or no training, then the percentages will be even lower. More than 4 million rounds of small arms ammunition They say this because it sounds big. The public will hear this and think, wow, it's a lot of ammunition. But a full-strength brigade is about 4,000 men. A typical loadout for an infantryman is 210 rounds in 30-round clips. And that's not even going to get you through a single significant firefight for part of a day. So 4 million rounds is probably not going to last a brigade a single week of heavy fighting. Then it says demolition munitions for obstacle clearing equipment to protect critical national infrastructure. I don't even know what that means. Spare parts, generators, maintenance, and other equipment. These are all important, but they don't give any quantity. They don't even tell us what specific systems are being sent, so we don't know if any of this is meaningful. But considering how meaningless the rest of this list actually is, I highly doubt there's anything in there that is going to represent any sort of significant contribution. We watch these weapon packages get smaller and smaller and smaller. We remember this from the New York Times in September. Russia overcomes sanctions to expand missile production, officials say. Not only are they making more missiles than the US and Europe combined, they're making more artillery shells, more tanks, more everything. They produce more of everything. And there's really nothing that the US or Europe can do about this. In order to reverse what is happening in Ukraine, the US and Europe would have to make significant system-wide commitments. They would have to reorganize their economies, their society, their education system, industry, especially their military industrial base. They're not doing any of this, not right now. And even if they do eventually decide to do this, it will take years to implement it. This is the point that I've been making for almost 2 years now. I've talked about how the Western media is trying to sidestep this reality, and they think that crafting better narratives than Russia is somehow going to win this conflict. And I think now they're coming to the realization that that is not happening. They're starting to accept this. They're starting to discuss this. But even at this point, we still see articles like this. Look at this article here from Reuters. Up here it says, how F-16 fighter jets could reshape Ukraine's aerial battlefield. The air war over Ukraine. Outnumbered and outgunned in the skies, Ukraine has used surface-to-air missiles to keep Russian aircraft at arm's length. The country's military hopes bringing F-16s to the fight will push them back further and keep Ukraine's air force flying for the long term. And almost everything about this headline and this subsection under the headline is false. Ukraine had a formidable air defense, network integrated air defense system. It comprised of older Soviet-era equipment, but it was still very good. And it did keep Russia's military aviation at a distance. But over the last 2 years, Russia has deliberately chipped away at Ukrainian air defense systems. They've destroyed the systems, they've exhausted their interceptors, and they've developed new capabilities that allow Russian military aviation to operate more freely along and even across the line of contact at this point. The West has been unable to provide Ukraine with enough launchers and enough interceptors just to replace what they have lost in terms of their own systems at the beginning of the special military operation. So not only are their systems being dismantled, the West is incapable of replacing them. They're incapable of replacing them in terms of quality and quantity. Sending F-16s is not going to change this. And I've talked about this at length many times before, about how complicated it is to integrate a new warplane into a military. It takes years to do it. You cannot do it in a year or 2 years, and you most certainly cannot do it over the course of a couple of months. And I said the exact same thing about Ukraine being sent Western main battle tanks. Just simply wasn't enough time to integrate them properly to be used effectively on the battlefield. That is exactly what it turned out to be. And if that's what happened with main battle tanks, what do you think is going to happen with a much more complicated warplane? The outcome will be even more disappointing, I assure you. The article says US-made F-16 fighter jets for Ukraine have begun arriving at training centers in the United States, Denmark, and Romania. By the way, Romania is still trying to integrate F-16s into their Air Force after many, many years. They still have not completed the integration. Kiev's allies hope the modern aircraft can push Russian aircraft further from the front lines, target radar transmitters more effectively, and hunt down more cruise missiles. The article attempts to make the case that these F-16s have greater capabilities than, I guess they are referring to Ukraine's Soviet-era warplanes. And while that may be true, they most certainly don't have greater capabilities than Russia's modern warplanes. Maybe they do have longer ranges than Ukraine's original Air Force, which has now been mostly destroyed. But what do you think is more likely? That the West can send more F-16s and train more Ukrainian pilots to fly them than Russia can produce in terms of air defense missiles and the cruise missiles that these F-16s are supposed to be shooting down. And toward the end of the Reuters article, they finally begin playing down expectations, and then they say, you know, the main point of sending the F-16 to Ukraine is to prepare it for its future within NATO. They're not going to be able to use Soviet-era warplanes. They have none left anyway, and so they're going to need an Air Force. The F-16 can serve as the foundation for that. When you're reading all of these articles, all of them, I think without exception, except for some editorials, the West is all but admitting that Ukraine has no possible way of winning. They cannot win. And yet they continue pushing everything forward anyway. Why are they doing this? And I think there are a lot of compelling theories as to why they continue pushing things forward. And I think multiple theories can be true. But if you go back to these think tank policy papers that craft and propel US and European foreign policy, regardless of who is president or prime minister, regardless of who is leading Congress or any of the parliaments in Europe, they talk about winning these conflicts, and if they cannot win these conflicts, to raise the cost as high as possible for their adversary. So for Ukraine, they cannot win. Ukraine cannot win, but they can raise the price as high as possible for Russia to win. And we've heard them talk about this in regards to, say, Taiwan. They've talked about the island province of Taiwan, which the US officially recognizes as part of China, and yet they're arming and backing and encouraging separatism within the administration in Taipei. But in their policy papers, buried deep inside, they admit that if there is a Ukraine-style war that Taiwan ends up in the middle of, all infrastructure and industry will be scoured off the surface of the island. They admit that Taiwan would be completely destroyed, but they're okay with that because it means maximizing the cost for China to win. And I think we're seeing a very similar process playing out in Ukraine. And I just hope that the administration in Taiwan, or say the government in the Philippines right now, are looking at Ukraine and learning something. Unfortunately, I don't think that they are. I think the US picks administrations who are more than willing to bypass logic and reason, follow their own ambitions and personal gain, even if it means at the cost of their island, or in the Philippines case, their whole country. It is definitely too late for Ukraine. It may be too late to convince the administration in Taiwan or the government in the Philippines, but if we can expose what is really happening and what is really going to happen to Ukraine, then maybe we could raise awareness among the public in, say, places like Taiwan or the Philippines, where they can see that they're being led over a cliff into certain disaster. Maybe there's time for them to prevent the same thing happening to themselves that is now happening to Ukraine. It is important to understand US political interference and also its different forms of military intervention, direct and by proxy. We have to understand what the US is doing and why, so that we can understand possible solutions and ways to speak up against it and stop it. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. There are also all of the links that I reference in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, thank you so much, whether it's a month-to-month donation, a one-time donation, or even if you're just helping share my work with others online. That is a great help. That is what makes all of this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.